Have you ever heard the quote, the reward comes after obedience? Well, ladies, today I'd like to talk to you about Esther. And I don't know if you're familiar with her story in the book of Esther, but she's this orphaned girl living in exile in Persia, raised by her male cousin Mordecai. She becomes queen through a year-long beauty contest, and she wins favor from the king. While she's married to the king, a plot to annihilate the Jews comes about, in which Mordecai tells her in these infamous words, "Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" He was reminding her that she was part of a bigger plan, and perhaps this was the moment she was created for. Have you ever been living in exile, so to speak, feeling like you couldn't possibly be used by God or His plan or His purposes anymore? I remember years back, I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I had moved there because I felt God leading me there. But once I got there, I couldn't understand why I was there, and it just felt godless to me. I just felt like I had taken a wrong turn and ended up there. And although years later now, and I'm living in California, I still don't know all the reasons why God had me there. But looking at my story now, it was a stepping stone to get me here to where I am now. And I learned years later that Santa Fe translates in English to mean holy faith. Perhaps God was using that godless place to perfect faith in me. Anyways, let's get back to Esther. Here she is, and she's forced to make a decision. Does she listen to Mordecai and act, or does she allow for deliverance to come from another place? Who knows that if we don't answer the call that God places on our life, He can and He will find deliverance from another place. He will use someone else, and we will miss out on being a part of the greatest story ever written. Needless to say, Esther acts. She fasts for 3 days before seeing the king, in which she herself is prepared to die if the king does not have favor on her. She is willing to sacrifice herself for her Jewish people. My favorite verse in Esther is Esther 5:1. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes. I love that. She stands in the court before the king, and he has favor on her. God calls you and I to also put on our royal robes. We are daughters of the king. How is God calling you to be obedient? You see, walking with the Lord is like a dance. He's going to lead, and it's our job to follow His lead. And He doesn't always give us the whole plan all at once, but He graciously leads us one step at a time. The Jews end up being saved. It's this beautiful story, and if you haven't read it already, I really encourage you to read it for yourself. God is not mentioned once during the book, but His hand is all over the pages, the events and circumstances that unfold, the themes that get reversed. It is incredible. Or feel free to check out my study on the book of Esther called A Princess with a Purpose. The saving of the Jews is celebrated annually in the Jewish feast called Purim. But Esther's legacy doesn't end there. You see, the book of Esther chronologically would fall in between Ezra chapters 6 and 7. Ezra is a descendant of the chief priest Aaron, and it says in chapter 7 verse 6, he was a scribe skilled in the law of Moses, and that the Lord, the God of Israel, had given, and the king granted him in all he asked for, and the hand of the Lord his God was on him. I love Ezra because I too love studying God's word, and it says in verse 15 that Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord and to do it, And he was doing it before God used him because he just loved doing it. What in your life do you love doing, but are you waiting for your big break for God to use you before you start using your gift? Or are you doing it now just because you love doing it? God leads Ezra to take another remnant of the Jews back to Jerusalem and build back up the people and the laws of the Lord. And he does it faithfully. God has King Artaxerxes, the Persian king, give Ezra a letter, and it's not just any letter, but this letter grants him offerings of silver and gold to take with him, to buy offerings to make to the living God. Also, whatever else is needed to take out of the king's treasury. He tells the treasurers to do whatever Ezra requires. He tells them not to tax Ezra. He speaks of God's wrath, his judgment. It's just such a beautiful letter, and it feels like it's coming from an Israelite, a fellow believer whom honors God and his servant Ezra. But it's from this Persian king. This Persian king was a son of Xerxes, Esther's husband. And although we don't know for sure, but it could very well be possible that Artaxerxes is Esther's son, and that she could have had influence on him to have such a heart for God and be used by God. Esther made an incredible sacrifice being Queen of Persia, because by doing it, it meant that she would never go home. But because of her obedience and her sacrifice, so many were able to go back and be blessed. Take courage, beloved. God uses us wherever we are, and all we have is all we need. And remember, when God calls you to act, the reward comes after obedience. God bless. Be blessed.